Welcome back, everybody. It's now time for our first response, and that's David Jones from the Open University in the UK. His response to the readings of the presentations we've already had this morning.
But very grateful for the opportunity to take part in this exercise. I've got thanks to Dell for inviting me, genuinely fascinating papers and project here. I guess I was invited because I represent something that's all been mentioned here already as psychosocial studies. I have a long-standing interest in the links between worlds of practice and at the same time concerned with politics and the social world. And I'm was these interests that led me to be identified as a psychosocial researcher. So I'm part of a group who've promoted the idea of psychosocial studies over the last few decades in this country. In that role, I'm currently editor of the Journal of Psychosocial Studies. I'll come back to saying something about what psychosocial studies is and why it might be relevant to some of the issues that are being grappled with here today. What struck me about, and I was sent review copies a little while ago, I struck me about the papers was a shared sense of struggle. Struggle to work in an ethical way, struggle for social justice, struggle to hear voices, struggle to be heard, struggle to understand, to be understood, issues of migration, mothering, racism, sexuality, struggle to balance the needs of individuals, interests of individuals, at the same time as being given to due attention to the social world. And obviously, the point of the title here, have we got it right? And I guess the subtext being, or are we part of the problem? I was interested in the questioning of the role of theory. It strikes me that, and I work in a university, I'm going to have to defend theory, but I think that theories are all around us. I think that we are always using theory, and maybe it's good to be aware of those theories and to be thinking about them. Maybe it can be a little bit dangerous when we think we're not using theory or we're not aware of the theories that we might be using. I was struck by what I now know is Harbinder's paper on race and psychotherapy training, the experience of the people that being interviewed there who black trainees in white psychotherapy institution who found a disconnect with the literature and the theories, the methods of the professional literature that they were being introduced to, but finding greater resonance in other disciplines such as sociology, history, cultural studies. And I think that's pointing us towards something very significant about methodologies and the frameworks of knowledge that we use, and the importance of being looking beyond disciplinary boundaries. And I think that's something that in psychosocial studies we've very much been involved in. Without going into the whole biography, I'll say a little bit though about how I came to be where I am, because I think there are quite a lot of resonances here. I was a psychology graduate a few decades ago now, and I was interested in research. Found myself working in psychiatric research, actually studying the impact of psychiatric asylum closure. And I was already and became more skeptical of the kinds of methods that I was introduced to in psychology. Really, the methods of positive science, studying only that which is observable, measurable, favoring laboratory experiments or designing questionnaires. All these methods just seem to miss something, the most important things in people's lives. In the case of the interviews I was doing there was the contradiction, the ambiguities that were most interesting and important, and just didn't fit into those narrow research frames. At the same time, I was interested in psychoanalysis, psychotherapy, and was considering that kind of career route, at least. And it seemed to me that there seemed to be some hope there of at least understanding the complexities of human life and subjectivity in a way that those, the positive methods of science just did not. But at the same time, I was also, I suppose, troubled by that the therapy world could be quite individualizing, it seemed, and quite exclusive, exclusive and perhaps excluding. I got as far as actually starting to see a training analyst with a view to a psychoanalytic training. And I remember expressing that concern about psychoanalysis being exclusive and only available to a small segment of society. I think the way I put it was something like, it seems to be only available in a few postcodes around London. And he told me simply I was wrong. I was simply wrong in my perception that psychoanalysis was not socially exclusive. And it was very difficult for the conversation to go further than that. And needless to say that analysis didn't go very far. Cut a long story short, I ended up doing a PhD and used what I would now call psychosocial methods, but I didn't call it that at the time, as I did not know that there were such things. But what I was trying to do was bring that way of listening to people and a sensitivity to unconscious and hidden processes that were often present in the research process and interviews, and some of the most important things were often not being said. At the same time as that, I was trying to be aware of the social historical context that I was working in. So a little, oops. I was subsequently drawn to identify myself as a psychosocial researcher, associate with an identifiable grouping, calling ourselves the Psychosocial Studies. Now we're outposts of psychosocial studies at the University of East London, Birkbeck, University of West of England, the Open University. In the recent years, they've become weaker. And there was a department at East London, there was a department at Birkbeck. They've now gone, really. There are still people working there, but I mean, Del mentioned the precarity of the universities at the moment, and the way it is difficult for these transdisciplinary areas to survive. So I'm now employed in psychology, in the psychology department. But as a society, we've been quite successful. We have membership, we have a journal, but the roots in universities are not strong. And this is quote, if you can see this from the website, psychological issues, subjective experience cannot be abstracted from societal, cultural, and historical contexts, nor can they be deterministically reduced to the social. Similarly, social and cultural worlds are shaped by psychological processes and intersubjective relations. So that's what we're trying to do. Sounds all well and good, but how do we actually operationalize this? What can we actually do? I think because a lot of people said this is what we're grappling with this. The current motif is I'm grateful to Arturo, I think, to change the Mobius scripts. Current motif of the organization is the Mobius strip. So trying to get at this idea that there's no such thing simply as the external, no such thing as simply the external either. I'll say a little bit about the history of social thinking. No, because in a way that, well, the history is in the schism, I think, in the disciplinary schism that occurred in the 19th century, with the big split being between sociological perspectives and psychological perspectives. And that's a deep split, as many of you will know, and it's become sort of both epistemological, methodological, with psychology, certainly university research psychology, taking a very positivistic route, sociology being more open to an array of methodologies and disciplinary thinking, really. but they become very, but this split, but the idea that there is, you know, you can study the individual separately from the social is become culturally quite deep. And it's this split that psychosocial studies is trying to heal, and obviously what you as a group are also struggling with. But I do want to mention that there is another discipline here, and I'm using psychiatry in a broad sense, partly to refer to that medical specialism, but also more generally thinking about disciplines and practices aim to support people in mental distress. So you include psychotherapy, psychoanalysis here. So I think that psychiatry has represented a different kind of thinking, but it is also subject to a lot of contest, as we all know. But I do think historians of science, philosophers of science, ought to be more aware, I think, of the significance of psychiatry as a epistemological framework, because I think that this has actually been very important, is what you sound to be grappling with, and what we are in psychosocial studies. More obvious immediate roots of psychosocial studies are, and I've mentioned the Frankfurt School, they've already been mentioned here. And I think there are really two aspects of Frankfurt School thinking. There's the critical theory, people like Horkheimer, which invited us to question the grounds of knowledge, I suppose, to look at how power was constructing knowledge, and to always be aware, to think about our own position in that. So it was always there's a reflexivity introduced there. What's our position in as we construct knowledge in those power structures? Associated with that, there's also the interest in psychoanalysis, of course, in the Frankfurt School, and growing up in the 1930s, particularly Erich Fromm, using Freud to try and answer the question, really, why was it that people were become so identified with and attached to those social structures that seem to do them harm? And his question in the early 1930s was looking at ordinary German working class who, in the context of economic distress and decline, were turning towards fascism, and not the what Fromm saw as the more liberating socialist alternative. Why were they identifying with something that was harmful? And Fromm and Marcuse argued that psychoanalysis was important there as a framework. But there's also UK practices, and I think that these are maybe not thought about as much, but they've been very important to psychosocial studies in the UK. So there's object relations thinking in psychoanalysis, which is quite an array of thought, but some of it very much about the internal world. Other object relations, I think, does introduce the idea that you can start to think about the join between the psyche and the social. And Winnicott, I think, is probably the most important example. That's interesting that how many times Winnicott has been mentioned today. But there's also the Institute of the Study for the Treatment of Delinquency that grew up in the 1930s, founded by psychoanalysts, but avowedly cross-disciplinary, bringing in social workers, lawyers, policymakers, all kinds of different people, so avowedly cross-disciplinary. We also saw the rise of group analysis, community therapies, which were introducing, I think, some quite radical ideas, really, about the significance of the group and the social and the links with the psyche. I'll mention Lacan just because I think Lacan it's been important to UK psychosocial studies and representing a different kind of language, but still grappling with that same, as has already been mentioned today, that link between the indivisibility of the link between the social and the psyche. I want to just quickly talk about, give you an idea of the range of methods that used in psychosocial studies. Probably the most obvious has been interviews. Really the techniques of listening, understanding have been taken from the clinic. The idea of listening to the unconscious and using that technique in research style interviews. And obviously Wendy Holloway and Jefferson's book put on the reference list. Perhaps the best known example of that. But that's something that's not without controversy, because in some ways that focus and dominance of the interviews has meant there's been maybe more focus on the individual than might be expected from those trying to take psychosocial perspectives. So there also, I think there's been becoming more attention recently to other techniques like observational techniques. And obviously there are links here with ethnography, and which is, I think, anthropologists, ethnographers have recognized the importance of reflexivity. But we've also seen the influence of infant observations that have come from clinical practice, clinical trainings, with the work of Esther Bick, I guess, who at the Tavistock described the process that asked trainees to carry out infant observations over many months, doing very fine, detailed observations with newborn babies, but also focusing on the emotions that are experienced through those observations. So we've seen observational techniques also being carried through into studies in psychosocial methods. But also, I mentioned Alfred Lorenz's scenic observation techniques coming from Germany, coming from a more Frankfurt School influence there as well. History, I think, is terribly important, and I think is being more recognized in psychosocial studies. I think history is everywhere, and it is essential and cannot be avoided. I was struck by Sally's case study there of that. Well, someone else referred to him as monstrous, this monstrous man, but his why he reacted to do-gooding and socialists in the way that he did. His father was brutalized by a regime that called itself socialist, and I think there's a nice example of having to understand not only individuals but our own histories and responses to those histories. It's just everywhere. I want to say a little bit about group methods here, because I think it's, in a way, I think psychosocial studies has been a bit slow really into getting towards really trying to understand the group and the social nature of the psyche. But it is happening, I think, with this interest in social dreaming and the visual matrix. So I'll just
under a minute.
Yeah. So I just want to say quickly about social dreaming as a method for exploring the psychosocial terrain. This is talked about by really formalized by Gordon Lawrence, who was working at the Tavistock Institute. But he acknowledges the significance of the work of Charlotte Barrett, who is a journalist who was working in Nazi Germany in the 1930s, and she was having these awful dreams about being persecuted, chased, shot at, scalped. This was in the early 30s, just as the Nazis were starting to seize and hold power. And she wondered, were other people having these dreams? And she asked people and she collected dreams. And she found, yes, they were having these horrible, nightmarish, anxiety, persecutory dreams. And as Lawrence makes the point that these dreams were not coming from individual experience of terror, of trauma. They weren't about intrapsychic conflict. They were coming from the culture, coming from the society. And yet there they were, working away at the individual psyche, so these dreams were not just a symptom of terror, that they actually became part of the persecutory culture. People started to be taken over by this persecutory culture. social dreaming as a technique is trying to tap into this. So what will happen in the same if you experience this social dreaming session, a group of people come together and share their dreams and share their associations to each other's dreams, not interpreting on an individual level, but trying to make sense of what's going on culturally by wondering about, are we having the same kinds of dreams? Are the same things happening? What might this be telling us about our culture? Gordon Lawrence links this to sort of beyond, and that maybe it's a way of giving us access to unthought thoughts, but which may be hard for us to think about, but are impacting on us in a way that we may not be always aware. And I think there's some important links here with Earl Hopper's ideas about the social unconscious. Earl Hopper was the Institute of Group Analysis, not Beyond, but so using a slightly different language, but I think there's something very useful and important links. And I know one of the papers are very much about the social unconscious. Okay, so I'll just sort of I come from a psychosocial perspective, but even here there are I think tensions. We try to avoid collapsing into the individual or the social, and it is also a bit of a struggle to survive and to think. I'll finish there. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you very much. So we've got 8 minutes for thoughts, comments, and questions.
David, I thank you so much for that wonderful overview. I've got 2 questions. One is, if I may, greedy as ever. One is, you talk about psychosocial. On your slides, most of them start off with the social in the slide, but the above is psycho. Is there a problem calling it psychosocial rather than socio-psycho? Or whatever, yeah, if you see what I mean, aren't you starting from the wrong place? Yeah, and that's one of the problems, although there's more power these days still in psychology than sociology, and so that's where you're based rather than somewhere else. But then it's becomes self-fulfillingly, doesn't get too far. Yeah, that's question one. And question two is with regard to, you're saying about the rise of the right historically. We've got such a rise of the right with the decline of the West at the moment. Today is the news, alarming news of Austria coming through the right, extreme right in Austria becoming the most popular party. Yeah. Any thoughts on that and what things that we can do?
Well, just very quickly on the language, yes. What to say? Quite right. There have been debates about whether it's interesting. I think no one's ever said we should be socio-psycho. I don't know. Is there something about the wording? I don't. There's certainly been a debate about whether we should have a hyphen. Somebody
around, isn't it? Yeah.
Psycho. There should be a hyphen between the psycho and the social. I know I don't favour the hyphen. I think the hyphen does emphasise the split too much. What to say about the dominance of psychology? Yes, I'm in a relatively unusual position, having a secure job in the university system at the moment, because I'm based in the psychology department, frankly, and it's very damaging. I think that this dominance of psychology. There are those of us in psychology who are now battling away for a different kind of psychology, but yeah, there's no doubt that dominance of psychology is a problem. It is a problem. Rise of the far right. Yes, I mean, what can I say? I mean, I wondered. I've been having my dreams have got more anxious. And I wonder, and is that about my age or something? There's stuff going on, but I do think, is there stuff? Is there the uncertainty, the kind of government we've had, the sort of war and the wars that are happening around us? Yeah, I do. There is some, I do wonder about that. How troubled our social psyche is. That probably doesn't answer very well.
can I just sort of, if I've got time, just to say something very quickly? I mean, thank you very much. Lots of really interesting things, and I'm sure that I can't sort of you know, pull them all together very quickly. But I was thinking whilst he was speaking that Nietzsche makes a comment somewhere about how basically we're dreaming all the time, you know, and I was thinking about that in relation to social dreaming, and the idea that the people, you know, people were sort of talking about their dreams, or rather, this person collected the dreams, and there was something about what it was showing, about what people understood without speaking. I guess I'm trying to say something about whether or not we're involved in social dreaming all the time, if we are always dreaming in a way.
I think in some ways that's the point. Yes, it's I suppose it's a method. It's trying a way of getting at what is out there that we are not thinking about. We can't. It's difficult for us to think consciously about, but it's there. It's part of our social psyches, part of the matrix, to use the language of group analysis. It's out there. It's affecting us. We're part of it, but it's hard for us to think about it. And I think the idea of social dreaming is trying to find a way to think, to process that.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I've been involved in some social dreaming, and I think absolutely that's what the social dreaming, the social dreaming sessions, or you know, help us to do. But I'm thinking something more sort of maybe a bit too sort of global. But I'm thinking the idea that if we are dreaming, most of the times we're making things up. Most of the times we're making people up, and we're responding to our own sort of thoughts. I guess this idea that maybe we're always involved in something like social dreaming when we think we're talking to each other. I mean, like now in this group, like that's the sort of thought.
Yeah, but that's not just. I suppose the point is, it's not just within you.
No, I absolutely agree. It's not just within
that dream is kind of our dream.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
Just one thing on that is, you know, this place of responsibility, because I'm struck that, you know, Nietzsche also said, you know, you would wish to be responsible for anything except your dreams. Yeah.
And I suppose the point, maybe we're not.
We're not responsible by ourselves, are we?
No.
There's something about it's us, and we know, if we can even think of ourselves as separate, there's something about this. It's we, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I guess in the therapeutic encounter, this idea of responsibility, sort of one of the questions you raised, Elle, around where does the therapist's responsibility lie for the social, and this is really the heart of the matter for me. Like,
Well, thank you for your overview of the papers so far, David. And thank you very much to everybody for participating, to responding to each of the presentations.